Well, this morning we've been looking at archaeology because archaeology is what God has raised up in probably just the last 100 years or so as a tool to help convince a very skeptical world of the truth of His Word. And we're moving to the subject of the Dead Sea Scrolls today. We'll be doing this for several weeks, looking more in depth at it. Today we're going to look at what they're all about, and then we're going to talk, starting next week, the significance of the Dead Sea Scrolls for Old Testament studies, and then the New Testament studies, and then I'll show you some of the work that I've done. Some of you may or may not know, Beverly and I have spent over 25 years at the Dead Sea. I was director of excavations for 10 years at Qumran, we're going to talk about this morning, and then later the cave excavation. So some of you haven't seen our work. I'll show you some of that several weeks from now. But right now, what are the Dead Sea Scrolls? You've heard about them. It's important. I usually have a little cartoon I put up here because our granddaughter, very young, knowing that Beverly and I were going to look for Dead Sea Scrolls, and she didn't understand what a scroll was. She thought we said squirrels. She said, she's finding those Dead Sea squirrels. And
she loves animals.
She loves animals. So
Dead ones too.
That's fit. So the Dead Sea Scrolls. But no, these are scrolls. The Dean of American Archaeology, William Foxwell Albright, really one of the great geniuses in the 1920s through 30s, established a whole lot of things in terms of archaeology in this country. Almost everything that did get started in major universities across the world was started by him. And when he got the first message concerning the discovery of the scrolls and saw a picture of what they were, he immediately sent his heartiest congratulations to the most momentous manuscript discovery in modern times pertaining to the Bible. And really that hasn't changed. There have been fantastic discoveries, but none in terms of that have affected the biblical text or understanding of it like the Dead Sea Scrolls. Just to show you that, every major Bible translation since 1950, when the scrolls began to be translated, have claimed to take into account the textual evidence of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So if you're translating from Hebrew, the Old Testament, because that's all we have in the Dead Sea Scrolls is the Old Testament, you've got to look at our oldest copies of the Bible that have a witness that goes back, 1,000 years before what we had in the versions from which English Bibles are translated. It also affects the New Testament. There's a number of things in the sectarian writings, which I'll be talking about, that affect our understanding of Jesus and the early church, because they were still very much practicing what they were doing at that time when all that began. And they, as you'll see, represent the only information we have coming from that period in the ancient world. So what is a Dead Sea Scroll? All right, we're talking about scrolls, scroll jars, and caves. These are all things that are involved in this. So what are they? Well, let me just give you some bullet points here. First, they're a collection of 931 documents from 11 caves. Really could push that number up to over 1,000 now, because we're only talking about fragments in multiple books of the Bible, copies of those, but that's kind of gives you, but they're not full scrolls, they're just little tiny pieces. We have some full scrolls, only one of an entire book, but most of them are just fragments of those books, and that's how we have a witness to what they have. That's what it means.
What book is in its entirety?
Isaiah.
Isaiah.
Yeah, and I'll talk about that next week, but that's the full copy. The oldest copies of the Old Testament. Your Bible in its Old Testament was translated from manuscripts that go back 1,000 years. These go back more than 1,000 years before that, and we had nothing before that. And so people wondered whether they had an accurate translation or not, because that information wasn't available. We just had to depend upon this text put together by rabbis who had been disputing with Christianity for, over 1,000 years at that point. Were there changes introduced? We had no witnesses. There weren't any other manuscripts we could compare to. until the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. That changed everything. There are Jewish sectarian writings. Okay, so we have biblical manuscripts. We also have these people who were scribes, priests, and they copied copies of the Bible. That's how we got these Old Testament copies. But they also wrote things of their own, commentaries on the Bible, and various other things that talked about their community and what they were doing and their practices, things that no one knew until these were discovered. They weren't recorded elsewhere in history. They're composed in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. Those are the three languages of the day. Most are in Hebrew. Next largest amount would be Aramaic. In Greek, only a small amount, because while Greek was kind of the lingua franca, everybody spoke Greek in those days because they had to. For religious people, Greek was not a language they were using. Okay? Even though the Septuagint was written in Greek, which is that wasn't used by most religious Jews. The Hellenistic Jews, the ones whose practice of Judaism wasn't as strict because they had merged or incorporated different types of things from the Greek world, would have used the Septuagint, but not these guys. So that's why we don't have much in Greek. And they were produced between 250 BC and AD 68. So 250 BC puts us in what we call the Hellenistic period. That changes when we have a revolt in the 130s, which 167 and 165, I think that's the dates of you had Antiochus IV Epiphanes, who was a Syrian Greek ruler, imposed his rule during this Greek period over Israel, particularly over Jerusalem, and at the Jerusalem temple, took away the Jewish priest, had renegade priests there, had pigs offered on the altar. They forced the Jews to no longer worship on the Sabbath, not to read their Bibles, not to circumcise their sons, to do all kinds of things. And this was intolerable, and eventually there was a rebellion. And a family called the Maccabees were the ones, Judas Maccabeus and his sons, rebelled, and then the temple was rededicated. It's called Hanukkah, so we have on the 25th of the month of Kislev, which sometimes corresponds on our calendar to Christmas, right? It's in that same season. That was the cleansing of the temple, and they drove out the Greek invaders, and for the next 100 years had independence again in the Holy Land until the Romans show up in 68 BC, and that changes things. But that's when they had their community started about that time, and they began to produce these documents in this safe, secure location. Jim?
I just want to point out that this period where you're talking about Antiochus, some people will look back at that as saying that was the Antichrist,
Right.
and that was the abomination that caused desolation.
Right.
But we don't believe that because Jesus talked about the abomination.
As future.
Yes.
And so, which Daniel spoke about, he said. So in Matthew 24:15, when he said, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, and he gives a warning. And he's speaking in the Olivet Discourse there about a future event. So obviously, Jesus himself corrects false notions about that. But scholars don't listen to Jesus, they make it their own mark.
So the
Well, in
sectarian.
this case, neither. I'm sorry, go ahead, Barry.
So in this case, sectarian writings are the Sadducees and Pharisees and who else?
No,
Who is
these
it?
are their writings at Qumran. So the sect,
I know, but-
the group itself, it's the sect, their writings. So sometimes they interacted with the Pharisees or the Sadducees, and that's in their writings. This is sometimes correspondence. Most of the time, I'll show you what it is later. Most of it is their own commentaries on the Bible, okay? Or it is like things about, like you have the War Scroll, which talks about the future end time battles, a commentary on Ezekiel 30, 39, or it's Damascus document, or some of these others that give rules for their community.
Which are the writings that give a window into the beliefs of the Sadducees?
Well, these do that. I mean, what we're seeing is they share the same culture and the same political problems and the same other issues. So as they write, they're reacting to some of the things going on in Jerusalem, around the temple, and so it's the Pharisees and Sadducees. And some of the things they write tend to reflect their viewpoint theologically against the other guys. They don't necessarily mention them by name. So, and then finally, these were hidden in Judean desert caves before the year AD 68. And that is because in AD 68, the Romans, putting down the first Jewish revolt, which started in AD 66, decided, any Jew anywhere is a problem, and they came down and burned their community, and they fled. So that ended the Qumran community at that point. Now, we're talking about writing the Dead Sea Scrolls. I should put this information here so you see everything. Dead Sea Scrolls are not just, they are scrolls because they're rolled up. There was no book form or codex form in those days. But what they are written on parchment, which is leather. So they took generally a goat, and they took the skin from the back of a goat, since each part of the document's only about this big, and they stitched those together to make a scroll. Sometimes they would use papyrus. It's a type of paper. It comes from a plant, usually imported from Egypt. There's not a lot of papyrus in Israel. And then they wrote with carbon ink. And this is papyrus right here, if you want to see what it looks like. Problem with papyrus, they make it from plant. They strip the plant, they take the pieces, soak them in water, put them together, hit it with a what's the word? Mallet, okay, until they adhere together, and then once it dries, it's like a sheet of paper. But that's very fragile, so you understand most of the New Testament was written on that kind of material, because the parchment is very expensive, and this is not. So that's why we don't have them. They deteriorate. They just don't last. Very rare to find. I have one papyrus scroll from around the 2nd century AD, and I don't dare try to unroll it. It just can't be unrolled. We're trying to get someone to, it's a method now called digital unwrapping, which they shoot some kind of beams or something through the thing, and the computer, it reads the text. It's all jumbled up, but then the computer can rearrange it and make it into text. So I've had that done once at the University of Kentucky, and they so badly handled my scroll, and they didn't get very good results, and he wanted to get it back, and I haven't been willing. I said, the only way I do that is if I hand carried it to you. I tried to actually mail it to them. Not in an envelope, much of it. Anyway, it's just too precious a document, and it's a nice Greek text, and could be important. There's one scroll. It wasn't originally a scroll. It was probably a plaque, but it was written on pure copper, and the text was in size. That's called the copper scroll, and I'll tell you more about that later.
Okay, were you able to visualize that?
Mm-hmm.
Were they able to visualize that and read the text?
Well, no, eventually was unrolled.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the University of Manchester, they saw it.
Okay.
It wasn't the best method, but a guy just with a saw between, as much as he could, between letters.
Low-tech solution.
And so you have all these sections.
It's in a module.
All right. Here's what a text would look like. Here's Genesis 1 and 2.
Wow.
If you can read Hebrew, the first letters are kind of off over here. Bereshit, Bara is probably there. Elohim et Hashemayim et Haaretz. You see the first line? It's a different. It's called Herodian script, so it's a little different than what we're used to. That's there. Here's a fragment of Daniel. Here's one of Leviticus. Not real clear. Here's a Psalm scroll. Get you to see what those things look like. Something that is interesting here that you may not have thought of. If you're looking at the text, it all looks different to you, but you see right in here, here, and here, and here, and here, and back down
That's
here.
the number of verses back then, no,
Huh?
I'm kidding. They were
Those are-
numbering the verses. I'm
No,
kidding.
no. The letters look different because that's the Paleo Hebrew. That's the Hebrew. The Hebrew this is written in is the post-exilic Hebrew. In other words, when the Aramaic script was picked up when they were in the years in Babylon. So it's not, so Aramaic is a language, and it's written into certain scripts, so they use that also for writing in Hebrew. And that's the Hebrew we use today, that's the letters. But the older Hebrew from the first temple period up until the exile had this is the name of God, Yud He Vav He. And so in this scroll, you're understanding the Psalms, and they're talking about God, and they're, in other words, it's just a unique thing. Rather than put his name in the newer form, they use the old text.
Is it-
Kind of a reverence for that. Yeah.
Is it the Tetragrammaton, or did they write
It's the
added?
Tetragrammaton.
Wow.
Yeah, that's what it is.
I thought they didn't do that.
What? Well,
Just
just
write
like
the
the
name of
vowels.
God.
None of these have vowels, so you don't know how to pronounce it. You know.
Yeah, I just didn't know they even wrote it.
Yeah, they wrote it. You can't, if you're copying scripture, it's a scripture. God's name is there, you have to copy it. But they're showing extra reverence to it. Here's,
Well, yeah, and it's not so much God's name as it's God's designation. Because God wouldn't tell him his name.
no, he says, that's my name, a
Okay.
memorial name, all generations. But we don't know how to pronounce it.
Okay.
We think we do, but,
That's our
We've got it
word.
worked down to two, don't we?
well,
That's our word, Yahweh.
I've gone through
right?
this before. The word hayah in Hebrew is the stated verb to be. And so when in Exodus 3:14, Moses says, "What is your name?" And God replies, "Ehyeh asher ehyeh." You know, I am that I am, or I will be what I will be, or there's different ways to look at it, you know. And so he says, that is what you shall tell the sons of Israel. I am, Ehyeh has sent you to me. So we know this must be based on a form of, you know, God being present or being, just I'm the one. You know, there's none like me. But we don't know how to pronounce it. So early in Judaism, they decided to keep people from somehow using that name almost in a magical way to try to get things to happen. In Judaism, there's a story of the golem, which is their version of Frankenstein. So they have someone made out of clay this huge kind of monster, and he's just made out of clay. But when someone they wrote the name of God on his forehead, still nothing. But when someone who knew how to pronounce it, the golem came to life. Okay, so that shows the mystic side of Judaism. But so they said, rather than have people, since it's such this ineffable name of God, we will substitute the name Lord for whatever this is. So they put the vowels, 1,000 years later, when they start putting vowels in, they put the vowels for Adonai, which means Lord, under the term Yud He Vav He, or YHWH.
That's all Greek.
Huh?
That's all Greek, what you're doing. Adonai is Greek.
Did I say that?
In
No.
Jehovah?
No, Adonai is Hebrew. Where'd you get Greek?
I thought it was Greek.
Kurios is Lord in
Yes,
Greek.
Yes. But I thought that the special name that we don't know how to pronounce, we call it today Yahweh, is that right?
Yahweh, that's some people, some say Yahweh, some say Yahweh, some say Yehovah, there's all kind of, probably Yahweh is the closest, but we really don't know. And so people will do that. In seminary, I was taught Yahweh, just Yahweh. But again, we have to confess, we really don't know. Michelle?
Is there another Hashem, the name? Did you say the name?
Hashem simply is the name, and so that is for religious Jews put in place of everything. So, you know, when you see the name of God, the text you simply say Hashem, and it gets worse than that. You have Ashkenazi and Sephardic Hebrew, and they have all different ways of doing things, and it gets crazy. But here I'm trying to show you what a scroll looks like stitched together. You know, that's the idea of that. All right, now, the people who produced this lived in a community. This community, it probably went back as far as the city of Salt, mentioned in the book of Joshua.
Really?
And it's possible that Elijah and Elisha talk about the school of the prophets, somewhere out in the desert. It's not far from here. Actually, that Elisha is taken to heaven, the place where same place where Joshua crossed with the army when they came into Israel. So the thought is that this could have been this place where the school of the prophets was. When I excavated this area, we found Iron Age pottery, which is the time, that time period at least. I didn't find pottery earlier than that, but this is considered the period from the time of King David through the end of the biblical period before the exile. And so there was someone living there doing something. We just don't have, because when these guys came in, they kind of leveled it and built their own buildings. And those buildings were there for over 200-something years, because that's how long the community was there. But this is an artist's conception based on what we have left. This was a sect, lots of debates about these guys. They did not tell us who they were. They used the term Yachad for them, which is it simply means community. So when you say who lived at Qumran, the Yachad did. So it's the Qumran community. That's all the word means. It means something like together. Psalms 133, 1 says, Hinei ma tov v'nama'im shevet achim gam yachad. Okay, remember yachad? So how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell in unity, or together is the idea. So that's what they picked it up from. Because of the religious nature of copying documents, because of everything that they left us is religious in nature. It all deals with commentaries on the Bible, priestly understanding of things, ritual. The assumption is these people were priests. They rejected the priesthood in Jerusalem. They had been kicked out because they were Zadokite priests. In the days of Solomon, that was to be the priestly line. And when you came to the Maccabees, they ousted them, sort of supplanted them. And from the time of the Maccabees on, it was not Zadokite priest. It was simply priests taken from other ranks. And so they considered that illegitimate. And they considered the fact that under Roman rule, things happened in the temple that shouldn't have happened as a violation of sanctity. So they left to form their own community where they felt they could prepare for the coming of the Messiah because they believed the biblical prophecies.
So were these Zadokite priests?
These are, in my opinion, they're Zadokite priests, okay? And here they're having a communal meal. I will talk more about that later because we found a lot of the remains of it. And the leader of the community was called Moreh HaTzedek, the teacher of righteousness. Early on, when these were first discovered, people thought, oh, this is the nascent Christian community, and the teacher of righteousness is Jesus. But that was all, a misunderstanding, not that way at all. And he died, and so people thought he was put to death. There's a lot of conspiracy, a lot of strange things. A lot of that's been straightened out as people have studied. Now, how did they identify themselves? This is from their own document called the Rule of the Community. And so here's what they said. They are to preserve faith in the land with self-control and a broken spirit, or a contrite spirit, atoning for sin by working justice and suffering affliction. They are true witnesses to justice, chosen by God's will to atone for the land and to recompense the wicked their due. In other words, they saw themselves in social justice, but they said the land is being polluted by people who are not obeying God's law. And we are going to do that faithfully, and in that sense, atone for them. They will be a fortress, a holy of holies for Aaron, all of them knowing the covenant of justice and thereby offering a sweet savor. They shall be blameless in a true house in Israel, upholding the covenant of eternal statutes. They shall be an acceptable sacrifice, atoning for the land, ringing in the verdict against evil, so that perversity ceases to exist. In other words, they wouldn't have had to do that if it didn't exist. So they're like people today who see what's happening in our land and want to do something about it. Now for them, they couldn't do anything. They had to get somewhere else to do it. So they were on the outside trying to be what, God would judge all the rest. They would be the ones that would redeem things. He says, when these men have been grounded in the instruction of the Yahad for 2 years, provided they may be blameless in the conduct, they should be set apart as holy in the midst of the men of Yahad. So they had an initiation ceremony. After 2 years being, what would you call it? Someone who... Apprentice, or basically...
Like a Padawan.
Yeah.
Only no
And a
light.
Jedi.
That's the right idea. They didn't, yeah. So, in other words, you had to have been pretty much blameless to that point. Some people think John the Baptist was part of this and then left them. There's no evidence of that. Talk a little about that as well later, Michelle.
Did they have women that lived there too?
They did, but not, in other words, think of this, okay, think of it as like a seminary. The term they would use would be yeshiva. This is a place where men who are responsible, women were not priests, men were priests. Women were the wives of priests, but they were not priests. So this is a priestly community, but the families lived outside in the caves and things, and the men came in each day to the yeshiva to study.
It wasn't just men.
It was just men we're talking about here, but they were not, the reason they were not celibate in the sense that they didn't marry. Jewish men were expected to marry, have families, and that's what I think they did.
There are women in the graveyard.
Right, okay, that's what I was curious.
Randy?
Jim, yes, sir.
Just to clarify, the artist building that we saw, you said that's just a seminary, they didn't live there.
Didn't live there. They lived there during the day.
Yeah.
So they worked.
They came early in the morning and they stayed, and some worked there at night. And there's times when they studied at night, and there's actually a room where there was people who kept watch
Yes.
while others
That was
did
not their
work.
residence.
Yeah. No, there's nothing that indicates residence. That's the thing. There's not. From our discoveries, there's nothing that indicates that they stay there. And that's why there's new theories that they only came at certain times of the year and were there for certain, like the high holidays, they were there for that time, but not other times, or the Day of Atonement, they were there, or something. Still, even after 75 years working with the Dead Sea Scrolls, we have more unanswered questions now than we did in the beginning, because we didn't know what questions to ask, and now we do. So where were the Dead Sea Scrolls discovered? Well, you can see the epicenter is Israel. Yeah.
I'm sorry. What you just said, what is the biggest unanswered question that we have today about that?
Okay, still unanswered are who these people were.
Okay.
Second, did they produce the Dead Sea Scrolls, or did they come from Jerusalem and were sent down, in hiding during the Jewish revolt?
Okay.
Or did they produce them there and hide them in caves? So the connection between the site and the scrolls itself is still unanswered. I mean, I think there's good, solid answers. The majority of scholars feel they haven't, but there's still people pushing back. And some of the work I've been doing has been trying to give us a very clear answer. So I think I can do that. I haven't published my stuff yet, so that's the job I'm still waiting to do. All right, geographical setting for this is the land of Israel. So if you look at the land of Israel, You see Jerusalem. Jerusalem's about 50 miles from Gaza, where all the fighting's going on right now. Qumran is about 20 miles to the east and south of Jerusalem. So Qumran is such on the northwestern shores of the Dead Sea in Judah in those days. So there's where it took place. Why there? Because something else was already there. They simply came in and followed through on some tradition that they knew. And up and down this Dead Sea coast on the western side are all kinds of Masadas all the way down here. There were all kind of other little establishments in between. So it was an active place. There were roads and caravans going back and forth. So it was isolated in one sense, but not totally. They had an influence. So we talk about the Judean desert. This is where we are. It lies between Jerusalem and the Jordan River and extends south to the Dead Sea and Qumran. There really are no perennial sources of fresh water in the vicinity of Qumran. The closest is the springs of the oasis of Jericho, and one little small thing at a place called Ein Feshka, just to the south. So they had to bring water in. They had no way of really getting. Now they channeled rainwater, and this was a big deal. So when you come to the community, you see these aqueducts running all the way through. They're cisterns connected by channels. The aqueduct is up higher, catches the rain. If you think about this, this is the lowest spot on earth. Okay, so it's 1,500 something feet below sea level. Jerusalem is over 2,000 feet above sea level. So it's almost a 4,000 foot drop from Jerusalem down to the Dead Sea. So when it rains, and it rains a lot in Jerusalem, where does that water go? Straight down to them. So if they could channel that, they could have pretty much water whenever they wanted. And that's what everything up and down the area of called the Jordan Valley did, especially Masada. Huge cistern, but bigger than, I mean, almost the whole half of this building would fit in some of the cisterns on Masada. It's huge things. Okay, so we talk about the Dead Sea. Let's just say lowest spot, 1,300 feet below sea level. It's part of an earthquake zone in the Great Rift Valley, starting way down in African Rift up. So the earthquakes are frequent in this area, which is why the caves I've tried to excavate have all been collapsed. We have to do a lot of digging to get to what's there. So this is kind of a very salty area, it's unique. There's no place like this quite in the world. This is the Madaba map. It's in Jordan today, a place called Madaba, Jordan. And it's the oldest map of the whole line we have. It's a mosaic map from the 6th century AD. CE is the same thing as AD. That means common era, but same thing as our AD. And so you see the Dead Sea, this is the Jordan River flowing into the Dead Sea. So fish are coming from the Jordan River into the Dead Sea, but when they hit the Dead Sea, they turn around and go back. Because it's too salty even for them. But Qumran is not on this map because it long since, this is 500 years after Qumran was destroyed, and nobody knew it was even there. Jericho was on there. I don't see Jericho from here.
Yeah, there at the bottom.
You see it?
The bottom with the palm tree.
Yeah.
Yeah, at the very bottom you see Jericho in Greek. See the Greek uncials down there, Jim? Yeah, if I point to it, my arrow right there, it's clear there. Okay, Qumran was actually situated at the time where the Dead Sea was situated closer to Qumran. Today when you go, it's quite a distance from the Dead Sea, but the Dead Sea has been receding constantly. When Beverly and I lived there in the 70s, the water was up pretty close to the road. Now it's a long ways from there. In this day, it was rather close to Qumran, so people would come there, they'd bring their little, do that right, their little boat. Okay, you could launch your boat out to the water. And that would take you back and forth to, today's the Jordanian side, and that day it was the Decapolis, the day of Jesus too. So here's a more little detailed map. You can see some of the freshwater wadis and things going. You also see caves mentioned on here, but this is kind of where they are, right
Randy,
there.
you mentioned the Decapolis, is it on the map there?
No, but you see where it says Jordan? It's there.
Further up.
Well, no, Edom, Moab here, and then Ammon at the top. That's the Old Testament designations for the area of the Decapolis. And it's Gadara, Perea, I can't remember, Bela.
Macaris is over here,
Macaris
where
is
John the Baptist was beheaded.
down here, down where, somewhere.
I think it's below the Dead Sea.
Well,
isn't it?
yeah, when you
No,
talk
it's
about
below
Mount
the
Nebo,
Yellow.
Mount Nebo's almost directly across from Qumran. So Mount Nebo's somewhere right over here. Macaris is down about halfway to Masada, which is further down this way, so it's kind of hard to tell. Here's what things look like. You have the Dead Sea. Where the Dead Sea used to be, water has receded. You have kind of dead soil called marl. You have sinkholes. In Genesis chapter 14, it talks about the kings in the battle with Kedorlaomer fallen into the pits.
Yeah, pit.
And pit in Hebrew, so it's intensified. So that's the sinkholes they fell into. I got into one time, not because it was obvious, it wasn't, and I realized real quick I got to get out of here, and did, but my shoes were totally ruined. I mean, it went up to my knees. I got out
What
of
made
there.
the sinkhole so different?
Here's the Genesis 14:10
Dangerous.
passage. Okay, literally pits, as you say. So, yeah.
It's kind of like maybe,
The rote, pits, something like that. That's just, we call it, we talk superlatives. We say holy, holy. Jesus would say verily, verily, or truly, truly. Simply we're saying it's really true. That's how you do
In
that.
that case, the only thing that has three is holy, holy, holy.
Yes,
my
that's
understanding, yeah.
the triagion, raised to the third level. So here is the site of Qumran. It's not a place people really like to go to. I have a crazy German friend who got married here. He liked it so much. But nevertheless, he take tour groups for a week or two to Qumran all around. Our tours make it maybe 10 minutes. I don't know. I take them out.
We try a couple hours.
I try an hour, but they run away from me. It's too hot. It's just not much there. But you're looking at this is a dry riverbed called a wadi. The caves are on this side and this side. And this is the plateau up here. I'll show you more of that. Here it is like an aerial picture of it, looking down on it. It's just a plateau that jutted out like this.
are these pictures you have taken with your?
Yeah, we took some with drones, and we took some, this is kind of taken from the area where our cave is, as we walked to the cave we excavated.
Now that riverbed, you can see down at the bottom, that's the wadi. And we were talking about the rains in Jerusalem. A couple of years ago, there was so much rain and flooding that the water came on top of that and flooded the plateau.
So there's the wadi,
Goodness.
and then here is the way it looks from ground level. And yeah, and they have signs warning people who do rappelling from these cliffs. They sound a siren. If it rains in Jerusalem, you better get off the cliffs, because that water's cascading down like waterfalls. And some didn't do it. It washed all these guys right off, and they found them, way downstream. So what they did right up here, they decided to install a camera, 24-hour camera, so they could watch the whole area and see people there. But they had to run the stupid cable all underground where I was excavating. So then they told me when I was digging it, what's this thing? And the guy said, it's $10,000 if you break that, fiber optic cable. And so we had to suspend the cable and dig under it. It was crazy stuff. Okay, how were the Dead Sea Scrolls discovered? This is the story you generally hear. Scribe first wrote a scroll using the pen and ink he had. Said they were written in these different languages. And then assembled the scroll, you had these tables like this. They took the individual sections they'd written and they stitched them together. And when they were stitched together, then they took them to caves and they were going to put them into jars, but they had to then seal the scroll too. So this is part of the whole process of storing a scroll. Put it in a jar, carrying the jar up into a very arid cave area.
What was the stitch material?
It's just, it's, most of it is a type of just fiber. It's just like,
Raffia?
I want to say flax, but we found some of this stuff, and
It's natural, it's
it's
organic,
actually,
obviously. It's
you know, it's from palms or whatever, made
some
into little things,
plant-based
and they, yeah,
as opposed to animal-based.
yeah, pretty much. It's not cat gut, that kind of stuff. I used to say. The reason for hiding the scrolls like this was probably drawn from this passage in Jeremiah. Before the exile, God told Jeremiah to go buy some land. And he said, take that deed of purchase, put it in an earthenware jar, and that it may last for a long time. That is after the exile. When you come back after the exile, 70 years, then you'll say, this land is ours. Here, I bought it. Here's the deed. And so this was a practice. They said, well, we want these things to last for a long time, notice, so they put them in jars. Apparently an ongoing practice. So 1 Corinthians 10:11 talks about how these things happened to them as an example. They were written for our instruction when the ends of the ages had come. So the whole idea of writing and preserving things is to give a record of the past, a testimony of the present, to warn those in the future. Very important. We're living in what one woman has called an ahistorical age. People really don't care about the past. They're only interested in what's happening right now. You know, what affects me, what's going, and that's why most of our institutions have stopped teaching history as we were probably taught it. I read how probably the major that's least, that's declining among all the universities is history. People are not care about history. And so, but we have to be guardians of history. We have to communicate the past. If you don't understand the past, you know, first, you're doomed to repeat it, but second, your present is based on that past, and your future is only as good as what you know about what has happened and how to avoid it happening again. So then we take these to caves to hide them, and their community knew where they were hidden, but no one else did. They would hide them in caves like this, and the reason is because, well, first off, it's a nice secret place. It's like an archive. You can put it there. But to the advantage of scrolls, stasis occurred. This is dry. The air has very little. They sealed these things. Okay, they wrapped the scrolls with a type of basically tore clothing and wrapped it with clothing, kind of like a shroud. And then they put it in the jar, and then they would put pitch around it and seal the top. They wound the scroll around a stick. Sometimes they took the stick out, sometimes, because we found a stick just right there in the cave that was used for that. But because it's dry, because it's sealed, papyrus, like parchment, stays the same. It doesn't decay that much. Only if it's exposed does it start to decay. So that's why no one believed when the Dead Sea Scrolls were found that they were really what they were. Could be that old. We have nothing that old. It doesn't exist. But it did in this case. So this was the advantage. Most of the scrolls were found here, about 1.5 miles from the Qumran community. You can see the little top of a house down here. Looks like a house. That's the visitor center at Qumran right here. So about 1 mile, and there are trails that go from here out here. So these are the different areas where they hid things. The Great Isaiah Scroll came from a cave right up here. The Copper Scroll came from a cave right over here. And so these were there. This is cave 1. you can see a figure standing there pointing to the one. You can see where it is. And that from this picture is way up here. Okay, so where you are.
Where's the cave that you found you were?
Other side. This is to the north, ours to the south.
Is this sandstone? It's pretty much 100%, or what's the mineral
No, it's
content?
limestone.
It is limestone?
Yeah. Most of these caves are what's called fault caves. When you come to Qumran, there are different types. It's marl. It's not sandstone. It's marl, which is the old dead dirt of the Dead Sea, but it adheres together like caliche. It's kind of like that. And I'll show you some of that. Here's cave one. The opening that you're seeing here was made by the archaeologist. Originally, that cave only had a hole much at the top. See that little hole at the top? There's one down below and there's one up above. And that's where they found these things, okay? So here's 1948 when they first got there. These were Bedouin. These are the guys, the Bedouins that discovered it. I met one or two of them and put them on film, but now you see the hole. This is the original hole. This wasn't. They opened this up to get in. This is all that was there. And the guys who hid the scrolls stood on each of the shoulders and dropped down in there. And so here's the idea, okay? So when these were first discovered, according to the local legend, which has become pretty much everything you hear, there were some boys out taking care of their goats. They were up in these hills. I don't know what the goats were eating up there.
Yeah.
There's nothing up there whatsoever. But supposedly they were looking for a lost goat, and they threw a rock in this hole to think they would scare out the goat. And instead of hearing the goat, they heard the breaking of pottery. Then they stuck their head in and they looked and they saw these jars in there, and they went in. This is my made-up picture, so it didn't really look that way. But they looked in the jars thinking they'd find treasure, and they just found all this, well, stuff they couldn't read, old, nasty-looking stuff. They threw some of it out and took some of it back to their tents and hung them up for a couple of years. And eventually one guy said, well, that could be, here's the guy, they're looking at it, what in the world is that? And I said, that could be important, has writing on it. You could probably take it up to the antiquity shop and see if you could sell it up there. That's what they did. But here's the guys who found it. I met this guy, took him back to the caves, had him reenacted on film for us. So
Was he one of the little boys?
he was one of the boys,
Okay.
original ones, yeah. He's in his 80s here. I continued with him up into his 90s. He lived in Bethlehem. They called him the Sheik. And I found him because there was a whole article written in Jordan about him, and had to discover him. And the guy working with us was the son of the Tamara Bedouin tribe, his chief. So they knew everybody, so he made the connections. The other guy, Muhammad Al-Asi, was one of the other boys. There's a bunch of boys. And for my money, there's a bunch of boys fooling around, okay, just treasure hunting, looking what they could find. There was the cave. They climbed in it. He's telling the story about what he did, but I don't think he's just telling the story. The other guy, here he is. And it was amazing. It was the summer, and I went up there in shorts and a t-shirt, and he's got 3 layers, including a sweater and an overcoat, and he didn't take any water with him. Just trotted right up to this thing like it was nothing, and it's a real effort. And he had a plastic sack with 2 hard-boiled eggs. That's all it took. What's the secret? But
So Randy called me, I was in Texas, and he goes, going up with this sheep guy tomorrow to Cave 1. And I said, oh, isn't he pretty old? And he said, yeah, he's in his 80s. I said, oh, I'm gonna pray for him. He said, no, don't pray for him, pray for me. He's just fine.
He said there were like 37 jars in here when he first saw them. Anyway.
But that heating is their type of air circulation.
So they,
sweat, they cool
so
off.
the military, yeah, it's wool. The military found out
all
that in this
things.
kind of climate, because it's dry heat, and you tend to lose your moisture by evaporation. It leaches out of you, okay? That a person dressed like that is gonna retain more moisture than the guy who thinks he's nice and cool running around. So it's just something they grew up learning. Now, there were 7 scrolls found in Cave 1. That's a list of those scrolls. The better one, Mitchell took it to this guy named Kando. That was back in 1948. I've dealt with, I never met him, but I met his 2 sons that one's dead now, the other's still alive. This was his antiquity shop. He was also a cobbler. We're full-time cobbler, part-time antiquity shop, and he got the scrolls. There were 7 scrolls. He got these. Well, actually, got 4 of them to start with. There were 3 others, and the Bedouin were trying to. They didn't bring him everything, and so he said, "Well, it's probably not worth anything. I can't sell them as antiquity. I'll use them to line shoes in my cobbler shop because it's parchment, leather, old leather." And of course, that's how you bargain. You make it. This is nothing. This is worthless. I'll give you this. Take it or leave it. And so he got the scrolls.
So those are the original jars?
No.
Those aren't. One of those is probably the jar of the temple scroll. He got the temple scroll as well. But the story of the scrolls, you didn't not going to get anything from this guy. Our knowledge of it doesn't come through the dealer. It comes from the next step in the story. Go, Jim?
But just so I'm confused, I thought that one of your discoveries was the pieces to the only complete scroll jar there is.
No. There are a lot of scroll jars.
Okay.
Very few have been found intact. There's a couple, but they have maybe in the warehouse 60, 70 or more scroll jars. There's only one in private hands, and that was sold to Mark Lanier down in Houston, $1 million.
Wow.
But, I have 7 scroll jars and almost complete. Okay, like I say, most all the scroll jars that were found they have missing pieces. Nobody knows why. Okay, because they kept saying, "Why in your this is a sealed cave? Why didn't you?" I don't know. But same thing up there. They didn't have all the ones we found, but partial. Okay, let's run ahead in time. The 4 scrolls are sold to a archbishop of the it's the Syrian Orthodox Church in Jerusalem, and he takes them to what was now called the Albright Institute, which was the American Holy Studies of the day. And there's a guy, just kind of a student there, but the student, because the top guys are gone, he says, "Listen, let me photograph this," because his job is photography. So he's photographing the Isaiah scroll. And because he photographs them all in the ceiling, I stayed up all night, photographed everything he had. That's why we had the announcement to the world of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay, coming out, this is 57, first time it was announced, but by 1950 they already are publishing the Isaiah scroll because it's complete and they can do that. So he was the one who sent the pictures to Albright, who said this is the greatest manuscript discovered. So where are the Dead Sea Scrolls now? We're coming to the end of our class, so let me just say, if you were going to look for them, where would you find them? Here are the current locations where there are collections of the Dead Sea Scrolls. They're scattered all over the globe. Okay, people have different fragments or things. In Amman, Jordan, you have certain scrolls and the copper scroll, because when the scrolls first were discovered and Qumran was being excavated, it was after the war in 1948, which put that area called the West Bank today under Jordanian administration until 1967. So anything discovered between 48 and 67, when much of this was discovered, ended up over in Jordan. They took control of it. And then there was a museum in Jerusalem. It's called the Palestine Archaeological Museum. 67, It's taken by the Israelis, it becomes the Rockefeller Museum. That's where the scrolls went. And then, okay, here's the Jordan Archaeological Museum where the scrolls were. They've now been moved. When I did this is the way they presented them. They had them in this little box with a little glass on it and a kind of a very typewritten text, sorry looking thing. I mean, I could have put my hand in there, grabbed it, and walked out. It was that bad. And they wised up eventually. I mean, you're talking about, if a fragment of an Dead Sea Scroll by the size of your thumb is between $600,000 to $1 million, think how much that, you're talking about $40 million in there. And displayed like nothing, like it's nothing. So they moved it to a new museum they built in Amman. This is here, the new National Archaeological Museum. They did the Dead Sea Scrolls credit. So now here's the copper scroll that they have there. In Israel, the 4 scrolls the Archbishop had were eventually sold through an ad in the Wall Street Journal, bought by Yigal Yadin, whose father happened to be the one who got the first 3 scrolls from those other Bedouin. And they combined and made 7 scrolls, and they built a building called the Shrine of the Book. That's it from above, that's it from ground level. And guess what this lid with this top of the thing looks like?
Hershey
Scroll jar,
Kisses.
lid of a
I thought
scroll
it was
jar.
Hershey Kiss.
Yeah, lid of a scroll jar. They have a black wall there, along with white architecture. This is simply artistic because in the scrolls, we'll get to this, but they talk about the war between the sons of light and the sons of darkness. And by the way, the Israelis in this war used the same language. It said this is a war between the sons of light and sons of darkness. It's interesting, they picked that up from 2,000 years ago. So the wall represents the sons of darkness, everybody else, and the sons of light, meaning those of Qumran. In the New Testament, you see that phrase over and over again. Paul talks about, sons of light, talks about don't walk in darkness, or he uses that. He even uses the term like that. In John, Jesus talks about the men of this age have more wisdom with respect to their own than the sons of light. He uses that term. It's probably a jab at them. Here's inside the building. So you're now inside the scroll jar. And in the center, you have the great Isaiah scroll, but it's only a replica. The real one is put away. It's only been out once in the last 75 years. And I flew over there to see it when it came out. Got to see it. So today people go and they just look at the text. It's a nice replica. Liberty bought a replica.
I mean, I get that, but I thought that was the real thing.
No, it's not.
Okay.
No, and we have a better one here at Liberty. Okay, I got Jerry Jr. So one thing I got him to do was to buy a copy of this. It was $125,000. I know because he sent me the bill, and I walked over and handed it to him. This is my name, but it came from England, and there was only like 4 or 5 of these done on parchment like this, exact replica, better than the one they have here in Israel.
Okay, now
So-
isn't the one you've got here, well.
I don't have it anymore. They came
Belonged
in.
to Liberty.
Where is it?
It's
It
in-
belonged to Liberty, so Liberty
Okay, the one that
took it away
Liberty
from
has,
Huh?
it's about 1/4 the size, isn't it?
That's the full size.
All right,
Exactly the
okay.
same.
Where is it?
It's at the scriptorium now.
It's in the.
Yeah, but they have it. They don't have a very big case for it, so it's it's like 20-something feet long, but they only have it rolled up and just a little bit
Yeah,
exposed.
I saw it.
So you can't see much of it. Now, where are the rest of the Dead Sea Scrolls? Well, most of them are kept in this vault, and this is only for the insiders. It's a secret thing because I got to be one of the insiders. At least that's what the curator of the Shrine of the Book told me I was. So it took me in. I wasn't supposed to take pictures. I didn't. Another guy with me did. So I got them from him. It's very dark in there. They just have a red light. All these trays are where the scrolls are. Okay. Now, the one time they did put out the Isaiah scroll. This is Adolfo Reutemann. He's the curator of the Israel Museum, and he's looking at them there. So you have museum exhibitions with pottery found in the Dead Sea, and you have all kinds of local exhibitions. This one was at Southwestern Baptist Seminary. I spoke at it when they had it there. This one was, other one was somewhere else, I guess. There's one in San Diego I went to. Here's the Denver Museum of Science. So these become like emissaries who go around the world showing the culture, the history related to Israel and the Bible, as a matter of fact. Here's the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. That's a replica that they're pointing to. They did have their own, a little more than a dozen Dead Sea Scroll fragments, but there were people who wrote and said they were forgeries, they were fakes, and they've had to back off. But they spent, I mean, umpteen millions behind these things, and now they're all supposedly worthless. In my opinion, they're all good, but you know, you can't. That's what the media does too. And somebody makes an accusation, you don't have to prove it or back it up. You just make it, and now it becomes a problem. Here is Azusa Pacific University. Had that. When I was started here at Liberty, I had access to buying some of the scrolls, and I told the powers that be then, we could be the first university in the United States to actually have a Dead Sea Scroll fragment. And they opted not to do it because it was so little and they couldn't wrap their head around it. I tried to give the analogy of, does your wife have a wedding ring? You know, does it have a diamond? That's small, you know, but how much did it cost? Same. Well, they just still couldn't do it. So Azusa Pacific was the first. Azusa Pacific bought some fragments and became the first, and they got the amount of publicity they got, okay, was worth much more than what it would cost to buy those pieces. We used to have the Liberty Biblical Museum, and there we had a Dead Sea Scroll exhibit as well. There's some private collections. This is a friend of mine in Germany, a man named Klaus Hunzinger. Left him his collection. He was one of the pioneers in the Dead Sea Scroll. There's nothing written on those things, but you can see the kind of materials that were used. So we do today have the digital Dead Sea Scrolls. You can go, the Mormons have a site where they've done this, digitized all the scrolls, as well as the Israel Antiquities Authority, and you can now find any scroll, zoom in, see the writing, do everything from the comfort of your, you know, living room, whatever you want. So all this is available today. But for the last 60 years was not. I've written some things on this too. I have a book called Secrets of the Dead Sea Scrolls. We did a film on it. I did a PowerPoint, not this one, others that they sell. I did some pamphlets and posters, all kind of things out there. So if you want to know more, that stuff exists. So for today, what do? We simply talk about what are the Dead Sea Scrolls, how are they discovered, and we're going to move now to the significance of them for biblical studies next week. All right, any questions?
Yeah, I got a couple of, one, they mentioned the copper one. Is that still the carbon ink?
No, that was incised on copper sheets. So they actually, you know,
Engraved.
had each letter like that.
Okay.
Push it through, and so it's a
And then the carbon ink used on the
carbon ink is on
paper.
the parchment and on the papyrus.
So does that contain carbon-14, and is anything done?
Well, that's what
with
it does in a sense, and that's what some people are claiming some of the scrolls are forgeries, not because the carbon doesn't date right. They're saying there's some kind of water molecules or something in it that comes from a source they didn't have, a more modern source. So there's a lot of weird stuff like
Yeah,
that.
that's the biggest farce.
And they also say that the letters are too uniform. Well, if the nub on your stylus wears out, you're going to create the same letters. You can only do these sharp and wide marks if you have a nice clean stylus. So a lot of arguments against it, but it was enough to cause the Greens and others to have to back off. I have a friend in New Zealand who has at least 10 fragments, wealthy guy, and he doesn't know what to do with them now because he got them from the same source the Museum of the Bible did. And he said, well, maybe I can just donate them back to Israel. I said, well, that's not gonna work if they think they're fakes. Work enough to donate them to me, but not there yet.
I have a question. Okay, they were making copies of copies. Okay, how old were those copies and how would they have acquired what they were
Well,
copying?
that's what I'll talk about next week,
Okay.
because that's what's important, the fact that, how old are these copies? In other words, when you look at the copies, just like some of you have Bibles and you take notes in your Bible, right? All right, so the Bible's older than your notes. And for them, they're study copies. They have something in all kind of marginal notes and things written in them, corrections. Again, you'll see we have like 38 copies of Isaiah and a bunch of Daniel, 11 copies of Daniel, a bunch. So they have multiple copies, and some are older than others. You can date those by carbon 14, because whether it's parchment or papyrus, it's all organic. You can do that, organic or, you know, it's got DNA in it. But
How would they have acquired what they were copying?
well, as priests, they've been scribes, they're responsible for knowing the text of the Bible, so they would have had that. Either as part of their previous community or personal possession. These things are very expensive, but they would have carried them with them. And since you have as many as 200-something people at any one time there, they're all bringing this stuff in and they're creating a library, because that's what they do, is they study. And as the things wear out, they copy them to make a fresh copy. And then they write their own stuff, so that's what's happening. Or they may have been writing copies so they had more study copies than just the few they had.
But like, okay, the original autographs, at some point, like, how were they copied, I guess? I mean,
Same way.
so
By
like in a
hand.
synagogue?
By
those-
hand, someone who is trained, by the way, from birth to be a scribe. This is your one job your whole life. And you memorize the text, you dress it a certain way, there are rules. You go to work every day, you know, dress to write into it. So, I mean, this is done by people who are careful, not just somebody, you know, like we would be copying something.
But they
These are
don't do it for
professional
living.
scribes, and,
But they would have been scattered. Those autographs would have been scattered in different synagogues? It's just
no,
the.
they would have made, generally, the autograph would end up in the temple, probably
Oh,
in the
okay.
temple itself.
Okay.
There have been copies made for, there weren't synagogues. There were synagogues in the first century, maybe a little before, but they weren't necessarily teaching institutions like they
Okay.
became later. They replaced the temple. So they might have had a Torah scroll, because we find Torah cabinets, we find Torah stands to bring the thing out. But like the other books of the Bible, the prophets and things, individual books, they wouldn't have had those. So people were pretty ignorant about what the prophets said. But people, almost every family had a copy of the Book of Esther, for instance.
Really?
And that's why, because it was a family possession, and at the time of Purim, they read from this. That's why I think that we don't find any copies of the Book of Esther among the Dead Sea Scrolls, because when they left, everybody took them. Didn't leave them behind. This wasn't something you had to hide. We're getting late, Jim, go ahead.
Yes, I know. I don't know if it's folklore, but I've read that Bedouin would say, oh, there were other jars too. And they probably sold those on the black market. But my question is, suppose that's true. If there was something valuable that was in a private collection or on the black market, don't you think that now, 60 years later, somehow it would have surfaced, we would know about it?
Well, Kando still has scrolls, scroll fragments. There's one huge scroll in a vault up in Lebanon, we know about. It's part of Genesis, the Joseph story.
But that's my point, you know
And
about it.
The Greens tried to buy it for $20 million, and they said no, refused. Wouldn't
Yes.
sell it for $20 million.
But my question is, wouldn't we know about these things after all these years?
We know some things. Some private collectors, if they got things in the past, just aren't gonna let it be known because they're afraid that someone will take them away from them. And there are better ones. When I was excavating Qumran, this son of the chief of the veteran track team, he said, I have a friend who's got a scroll. Would you like to see it? Oh, yeah, I was excited. And then my other Israeli friends who are archaeologists said, if you do, you'll never excavate here again, and they'll kick you out of the country. I said, oh. So it really was that was really a crisis of whatever. So I didn't do it. The next year, another guy who was an archaeologist, Israeli archaeologist, heard about it, and he actually went and saw it and bought it. It's a fragment of Leviticus, what it was. And he bought it for like $3,000, which is, I mean, you could sell it for $30,000, easy. Or you could sell it for $300,000, more. I mean, he bought it for $3,000, walked in, gave it to the state of Israel, said, I'm giving this to you, I bought it for us. They blackballed him. He got kicked out of his job as the head of the department at Bar-Ilan University. He was put on trial. I mean, it was just horrible the way he was being treated, because he dared to dabble with the black market, you know, to buy such a thing. And he died a year later from cancer. He was Hanan Shell, leading guy in this field. So it's a good thing I didn't get it, because and that's what they did to one of their own. I'm a foreigner. I'd have been, you know, blackballed from entering the country. But there are things like that out there somewhere, Jim. I know people tell me about caves all the time that have stuff in it. I saw it back in the 50s, blah, blah, blah. You know, I'll take you there. Well, it never happens sometimes. You never get there. This one guy said, the Jordanian shot me in the foot. I saw the stuff. They shot me in the foot, and I had to get out. You know, and Bedouins are roaming through the desert now, looking in caves and trying to steal anything they can. And the private collections, I know of some of these, but most people know them too. The big guy in Norway has got like 137 fragments of Dead Sea Scrolls, but he's published them. Everybody knows what they are. His name is Martin Cohen.
We have a friend that is the head of the Bible Society in Jerusalem, or over Israel. And you walk in, and they have a Dead Sea Scroll in the little Bible Society store.
Well, that's
Authentic Dead Sea Scroll
but it's
jar.
lit to
Not
it's
scroll,
lit,
jar.
A jar, yeah, the jar of the scroll. That's lit to them by it was lit to them by the Antiquities Authority to put on display. They don't own it. No. Anyway, thank you guys. We have a word of prayer and we'll dismiss here. Father, thank you for preserving the past so that we can learn from that. We'll see later how important this was for interpreting and translating the scriptures. You take care of your people. You help us. There's still much yet to be discovered and revealed. And we just ask, Lord, that you raise a people by which that can be done. Just exciting to see all that you'll do in days to come. For us, Lord, help us live by faith this week, trusting in you. There's a lot we don't know, but we know you. And to know you is to have everything we need for life and for godliness. And help us just walk close to you in Jesus' name. Amen.